Okay, so I think we'll get going. So firstly, a very, very warm welcome to this webinar on China market and dynamics. Clearly a very, very important topic. So thank you very much indeed for joining. So a quick word on the presenters for today. Very pleased to introduce Neil Appleton. Neil is Senior Vice President for Society Business Development here at Elsevier. And also very pleased to welcome Wenyi Zhou. Wenyi is Director of Journal Strategic Partnerships, again, in the Society Business Development Group. And also for those that I haven't met, my name's Steve Wim, Society Business Director. And again, I work in the Society Business Development team at Elsevier. So a quick word on the agenda and a few housekeeping before I pass over to Neil. First, we're going to cover market trends. So this is particularly looking at China in terms of the article growth, perhaps a little bit more importantly, the growth in quality of the content. So that's the first part. We're then going to look at the China's strategy and priorities, which of course then helps to inform your own journal strategies and tactics. And then we're going to look at two factors that have particular importance in China in terms of impact metrics and journal lists, which particularly influence author decision making in terms of which journals they publish in. We're then going to have a wrap up at the end, and we're taking some questions also at the end. Also, a few things to note, and this session is being recorded. So as per the other webinars that we've had, at the end of this session, we will create a Societies Update article from the recording of this session, and then that will be made available to you afterwards. So please do keep an eye out for that. Also, there's a lot of people joining this call today, so your volume will be muted, so you won't be able to talk. However, we'd encourage you to ask some questions, raise any concerns or queries you have, using the chat function of Zoom. So please do that. And what's going to happen, Neil will go first, then pass over to Wenyi, and then back to Neil. And at the end of the session, I will pick up those questions that we'd very much like to ask and answer on your behalf. And then for those that do want the words to come up on the screen, please do click on the live transcript on your screen. Now, it should be at the bottom. So if you can click on that, that will ensure you have the words come up on screen. Okay, so with that, I'm very pleased to hand over to you, Neil. So Neil, over to you.
Thanks, Steve. I appreciate it. And thanks everyone who's been able to make it today. Much appreciated. And just to pick up something that Steve alluded to, this is probably the first in what we think will probably be a series of webinars on China, because it's such a it's a vast topic for all of us. And today we'll concentrate somewhat at the high level. I know that we'll have different people at different levels of knowledge, kind of engagement in the Chinese market, maturity in terms of the journals development in the China market. So bear with us as we try to find out kind of where to pitch the level of these sessions, and looking forward to your feedback at the end on exactly that. Yeah, indeed. Without further ado, so I run the overall development of our society portfolio. I've been in the role for 3 years now. I love it, and we are seeing change. And I'm a change person, and China is a huge part of that change. Open access as well, of course. The declines in the commercial markets, all of that. But China is a huge part of that. And my abiding sentiment on China is on the screen now, that tomorrow is already today. Every prediction anyone seems to make seems to come true a little earlier than we expect. And that is true of the volume and quality that we will turn to now. So taking a look at these two charts, and on the left-hand side you have volume, which is a story that we all know, and on the right-hand side you have quality, which is a story I think we kind of all know, but we haven't fully embraced. And the reality is that China is outpacing the global market, full stop. It's outpacing it in funding, it's outpacing it in volume, and it's outpacing it in impact. And that presents opportunities and challenges for all of us. China's investment, from a funding perspective, is expected to exceed the EU by 2025. Then from a pure volume perspective, you can see on the left-hand side that China has led the market in article volume since 2017. But I think we all know that. We all experience the challenges as well as the opportunities of that. It's an enormous body of content, and it's a lot of people to work with, collaborate with, and adapt to. But the slightly lesser acknowledged, I think, story is the quality development in China. So here we measure quality here quite frequently by FWCI, because it normalizes for all of the subject and discipline volatility the impact factor does not. And so when we look at FWCI, average is 1. FWCI is field weighted citation index. As I say, average is 1, and you see that global quality historically has been primarily vested in the US publishing market, and the output, both the output in terms of volume and quality, has been incredibly impressive. The EU, very solid, is the kind of grey line that goes across the middle. It kind of starts at 1.04, ends at 1.04, but the most obvious line to look at is the red line, and that is China, of course. And it's the gap that closes so fast. Remember, 0 on this is like nothing. And so, you know, anywhere even close to 1. Anywhere above 0.7 is, you know, the quality is kind of okay. You know, it's below average, but it's not terrible. China started this period 2016 to 2020 at 0.89, and the US was at 1.38. So it's a gap of a full half point, which is huge on this scale. That gap's now 0.12. They've closed 75% of the gap in 4 years. And you can see the trajectory, and the trajectories, both trajectories will continue in our forecast, certainly. And so you can expect that China not only provides the most volume, but the most quality, or the most relative quality within 2 years. And that's a profoundly different world in which we're operating in, and has real implications for us as your partner, for you in terms of your engagement in dominant volume and impact markets. And that's some of what we want to start to unpack today. I would point also to the some data behind the data. It's not just generally solid, China's quality impact. Of the global top 1% cited articles, China has over 21% share. So of the global top 1%, China has over 21% share. That share is not it's not business model biased, and we'll go to the next slide, and you'll see just a short highlight on open access, this just highlights the both the growth in China, but also the share that open access enjoys in China. And there's one particular data point here that I will pull out, which is in the bottom right-hand corner of this chart. There's 186,000 articles coming from China on an author pays basis. And that is growing. That's growing at about 20%. So next year, China's author pays volume will be half of the US's total volume. China's author pays volume will be half of the US's total volume. And so it's, to me, this is super fascinating. And it drums home a really material point, which is that in China, the opportunity is as financial as it is publishing led, because of course in an open access world, you have the opportunity to capture really good quality papers from authors who are prepared to pay for that privilege. I'd also highlight that I've seen many times the observation that open access quality in China lags subscription quality, and it does not in our portfolio. So going back to the FWCI comments earlier, where 1 is average, and anything above 1.3 or 1.4 is very good quality. The China open access FWCI in our total portfolio, including all of the society titles, is 1.54. Literally 50% better than average, and it's really astonishing. And so the opening essentially is meant to share the story of tomorrow is today, because the volume is there and the quality is there. And let's take us through to the next section, which I'll start to move through relatively swiftly. Because it's really valuable, I think, to look at it from China's lens as well. And from a China strategy and priority standpoint, we've done a lot of research. We've looked at, we've had thousands of interactions with researchers, interactions and partnerships with key opinion leaders and institutions, very thorough analysis of relevant internal and external data, particularly author surveys, of which we've done many, and workshops with our own teams and institutional partners. And broadly, China's long-term strategy boils down to, on the left-hand side, some very forthright and clear goals and benchmarks over a midterm time period to go from being innovation-driven to being the innovation centre in the world. There are really concrete commitments in there, R&D going from 2.5% to 4% of GDP in just 15 years. And then on the right-hand side, within our world, academic publishing, a very clear focus on key disciplines, key people, and key institutions. And in terms of those key disciplines, the disciplines here are detailed in the table, and I won't go through each of them. But essentially what China does, and actually does very well, is that they will deliver material amounts of funding to focus disciplines. And here you see the kind of 8 primary selected disciplines. This is under constant review. There's an adaptiveness to this that means that as new disciplines emerge and new peaks of research within China emerge, they will attract funding, and we are seeing that. But it's definitely, there is a discipline specificity to China's approach. As is on the next slide, there a people specificity, because what we see here is that there's a somewhat top-heavy approach. And this is a theme that you'll see throughout this presentation, which is, I feel, and I could be wrong about this, but I feel that we underestimate perhaps China's level of commitment to quality. And so when we look at this chart, when you actually read it backwards, you see the huge volume of researchers, early career in R&D, in the kind of China infrastructure, the pyramid that is Chinese research. But as you move towards the left-hand side, you start to see the future leaders, the leading PIs, and then the academicians. The academicians they're like the fellows of the Royal Society for a Brit like me, and there are 1,600 of them, and we make very best efforts to get to know them. The leading PIs, and then the future leaders that are identified by a mix of different programs. They are incredibly well funded, as I'm sure many of you have observed in the disciplines that you work in and serve. Incredibly well funded. One small data point there, which is that a PhD researcher in a double first class discipline in a double first class university in China will be at minimum 20% better rewarded than an equivalent in a leading US discipline and institution. And this is a fundamental commitment that China makes to building for the future, to encouraging Chinese students to come back after the international experience, which again, they're absolutely encouraged. And to also attracting the best from the West. Is one of the phrases that China uses and embraces. And then the third part of this segmentation is key institutions. And I mentioned double first class a moment ago. Double first class initiatives are, it was launched by the Ministry of Education 5 years ago. The goal is referenced on the first slide, which is to build a number of world-class Chinese universities. These numbers, again, are evolving because China grows so fast, and the number of disciplines is expanding and pivoting a little bit as well, but mainly expanding as they build on the success that you saw in the first slides around their quality development over the last 4 to 5 years. And you see here that the first-class universities are 42 first-class universities, and you can absolutely bet that China's goal is to see those 42 within the top 100 by 2050. And that is a very, very powerful statement of long-term commitment to the kind of volume that we already see and the quality that we're shining a light on here. So let's flip to the next slide, which takes a slightly different perspective, because we also want to surface in the context of China, what do China authors want from us? And we've done a significant number of very, very wide author surveys. I feel it's super important to deliver to the Chinese researcher. And this was one outcome of that, which was the factors that drive journal choice for authors. And we're going to dive into, although we want to stay somewhat high level in this session, we're going to dive into two of these. In the red, you see journal impact metrics. So journal reputation, which is close to metrics. That's not obviously metrics, just a part of reputation. But those two pieces, the most important very significantly for Chinese authors. Speed really matters. We're not going to touch on it today, but speed, especially peer review and ultimately publishing, really matters to Chinese researchers. And recommendation, being on the right lists. And Wen Yi is going to help us unpack what the two primary right lists are as we go through the presentation. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to Wen Yi now, and she's going to take a bit of a deeper dive into those author priorities.
Thanks, Neil. Hi, everyone. This is Wen Yi. Very welcome that you joined our session today. So I will be talking about the research policies since 2019. So we have already covered the factors that are driving the journal choice among the authors. So right now, the policies also have a direct influence upon the researchers' behavior. In 2019, the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Science and Technology, they jointly released a new evaluation and publications policies. So in the articles, we have noticed some interesting points and we'd like to adjust them here. So the first point is that the academic performance will be more based on representative works rather than the sheer number of publications. In other words, the quality will be valued more than quantity. And in terms of quality, the representative works here, it really means the breakthrough discovery, milestone research, things like that. So one person can have like 4 to 5 representative works, and he is no longer to be required to publish numerous articles and which have less impact. So the second point that we would like to notice is that more than in addition to impact factors, other metrics are being developed or perceived by the institutions and authorities to evaluate the performance of the researchers as well. So in addition to impact factors, the CAS Journal Rankings, which Neil has already mentioned, is one of the most important journal lists in China that most librarians and researchers, indeed it is more the researchers who will look at this list to publish their works. To promote the domestic, sorry, back to the previous slide. So you possibly know that starting from 2019, CAST, in other words, is Chinese Academy, Chinese Association of Science and Technology. So CAS has launched a program called Journal Excellence Action Plan for 5 years. So this year will be the 4th year. So for the past 3 years, around 370 journals are selected into this program. And among this, over 300 titles, over 200 titles are English, and about 80% of the titles are collaborating with international publishers. So we Elsevier have a large stake in these high quality domestic journals. So CAST is promoting these titles to the Chinese researchers, encouraging them to publish in these titles. So we've mentioned about 2 journalists. Well, one is good and the other one is bad journals. So we will be elaborating these 2 lists in the later section. So the final point I wanted you to notice here is the publication fees. So in other words, the APC. So the authorities have set a ceiling amount identical US dollar 3,000. So for researchers to pay to most journals for their publications. So if an article is charging, so if the publication fee is over 3,000 US dollars, the authors would need to submit the application and get his institute's academic committee's approvals and to provide some justification. So this is not going to exclude certain very high esteem prestigious journals such as Nature, Cell Press, and a lot of Elsevier's good titles. However, we can observe from this policy that China is really wanted to spend its research funding wisely. Yeah. So back to Neil.
Thanks, Wenyi. I'll move very quickly through journal metrics now, because to some extent there's only so much you can do around journal metrics, and then we'll come back to this these lists that we mentioned. But it's important just to I think make you at least feel at home like in the Elsevier ecosystem from a journal metrics perspective, and see how China sees us together. And actually we're seeing very well. That's the good news story, is that we've mentioned the CAS Journal Rankings, which Wenyi will unpack a little bit more. It's an unusual ranking because you see in the MECO here on the left-hand side there's tier 1, then tier 2, then tier 3, then tier 4. And tier 1 is just the top 5% of journals as China sees them. And tier 2 is the next 10%. So there's only 15% in the first 2 tiers. And then through to 50% in tier 3, and then the rest in tier 4. But even that is a subset. Because that is already a subset of all of the journals that exist. We'll unpack a little bit of exactly what that subset looks like in a minute. But you can see that Elsevier has a phenomenal market share within the tier 1 and tier 2 subset, which is where we want to be. And of course, you as society partners are a huge part of that. And it's incredibly healthy for us to be there, because of course it means that we can continue to harbour those good submissions from good authors. On the OA side, which is on the right hand side of the page, we're kind of catching up. Springer got off to a kind of earlier start than we did, actually in open access more than actually China, but in open access. And we've been catching up rapidly with many of you on that journey with us over the last 2 to 3 years. And looking to replicate the same kind of proportions that you see on the left hand side on the right. And then going to the next slide, just a couple of snapshots, 3 snapshots in fact, of what China sees when it looks at Elsevier. So on the one hand, when they look at our journals, particularly on new journals, and when you will talk about the kind of specific role of new journals in a later slide, they see that our new journals, and then that again includes society journals, not just our proprietary portfolio, that our new journals, when they launch faster. So our time to impact factor is much lower than comparatives. And then right at the bottom there, you see the value of the first impact factor is also higher. So you get this kind of double effect of faster and higher, which is perceived very well by decision makers in the China ecosystem. FWCI on the middle, you see that there's the beginnings of a separation. Again, which is very positive for our overall adoption and engagement with Chinese authors. And that author perspective is portrayed on the right-hand side, where you see the NPS, and the NPS essentially, where if we get a 9 or a 10, they're a promoter. If we get a 6 or below, they're a detractor, and it's just promoters minus detractors. And you see our score of well over 60 there, and some separation between what Elsevier is delivering in the market on your behalf and the market. So a really powerful submission and citations position in China. And the question, when we talk about this is, what can you do? Well, the volume, there's not much you can do about it. The volume is there, right? The quality is a challenge, because of course we all have the challenges of language, sometimes an over-regional focus in the content, reviewer availability, quality perception. I think we all, will kind of tend to, we have lagging data in this industry. It's entirely natural that we have a lagging perception of quality. But the quality is changing so fast. Speed and acceptance perception from the authors, because we need to show them that we are there to be fast and with a bias to publish on their behalf. And what tools can we use to serve those needs? Editorial policy, of course, editorial board makeup, reviewer network development. On both of those, I thoroughly encourage you to talk to your publisher. Form analysis, the fate of rejected manuscripts, which is fascinating, because we see that a lot of our rejected articles are reappearing, and are reappearing quite successfully elsewhere. Journal metrics showing on journal homepages, speed and acceptance rates. Language editing, where language editing, there is a 3x difference in acceptance rate for language edited versus non-language edited papers from China. 3x. So there are tools there around the quality piece that thoroughly encourage you all to leverage, and I know many of you are thinking about all of these and more already. But today we wanted to spend some time on these journal lists, which Wenyi is going to walk us through. And so back to you, Wenyi.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. So I'm going to introduce you the 2 most important lists both issued by CAS, in other words, Chinese Academy of Sciences. As China's national powerhouses of research, So CAS developed these two journal lists for its own use, but whatever CAS developed or issued, it will be gradually adopted and used by the entire researcher community across the country. So here we have two journal ranking lists. One is CAS Journal Ranking. In Chinese, it's called Fenqibiao. Literally means the journal partition table, developed since 2004. And another one is called CAS Early Warning List of International Journals. It's launched since 2020. Next. So let's first take a look at the CAS Journal Ranking List. It is the most recommended journal list among Chinese researchers based on our author survey last year. So we have put together many different journal lists for the question about which journalist is the most recommended for their choice upon publishing the article. So it is of no surprise that CAS Journal Ranking List is the first choice, and even before the JCR ranking list. And this overwhelming percentage at 86% also has little deviation across different subjects. No matter a researcher is from health science, life science, physical sciences, or even social sciences. There is virtually little deviation among the researchers from different sectors. The situation is also true among the researchers in their different career stages. No matter they are in early stage, middle stage, or later stage, all think CAS Journal Ranking List is the first prioritized list they should be looking for upon choosing a journal. Next. So for the next 3 slides, I will briefly talking about the background and certain elements of this CAS Journal Rankings. So they are of many details, and rather that you will read it after this session, but here I will give it a brief introduction. So this journal rankings list is released every year in December, and its database is mainly based on SCIE, SSCI, and one additional part, there are 113 Chinese journals sourced in ESCI. So in other words, it's basically the JCR database plus the Chinese journals sourced from ESCI. And CAS Journal Rankings also adopt a hierarchical rank system. It has 4 tiers. However, different from the more familiar 4-quartile ranking of JCR. The CAS ranking system somehow divided these tiers by using different percentage of the journals. So tier 1, they are the top 5% of the titles, and the next 15 goes to tier 2, and the next 30% goes to tier 3, and the remaining goes to tier 4. The ranking metric is Citation Success Index, which is developed in 2019. So talking about the users, we said that it's the first choice among all Chinese researchers, and across the country, around 465 Chinese organizations have subscribed to this journal ranking database, including the institutes of CAS itself, and also the most leading universities in China. Next. So I've said that CAS Journal Ranking System has developed, its own indicator has evolved over time. Before 2019, there was the old approach, which was basically using a 3-year average JRF upon the SCIE index journals sourced from WOS. And since 2019, a new approach was adopted, and the CSI, which is Citation Success Index, which I have already mentioned, was put into use. And for the past 3 years, these two approaches were used simultaneously. And it is decided in this year that in future, only the new approach will be used and applied. So this new approach basically, as I said, it's citation success index. I will show you the formula in the next page. And it's also, the data sets also increased from SCIE to SSCI plus the Chinese journals sourced in CSCI. Next. So here is a very complex formula, but basically this CSI tells the author the probability that the publications in the journal A are more cited than publications in other journals that fall in the same topic and the publication type. To summarize the implications 1, 2, 3, the citation success index tried to use a more averaged, balanced view of cited articles, and a large number of cited articles in the major topics can have a higher CSI than a journal with a smaller number of cited articles in the major topic. So this is to say that it's better that a journal has evenly distributed citations across all articles. It will have a higher probability to obtain a higher CSI. Next. So every year when this journal ranking is released, so we can, after that, we can observe certain behaviors from the researchers. And the growth potential of submissions from Chinese authors, to put them in order, you can see that the newly added journals to this ranking list will observe the highest growth potential. Coming next are those titles moving upward. And next, the tier unchanged and tier down, obviously they will take the latter place. Next. We will revisit the slide here. We've mentioned that for the first 50% of the titles in any subject area. So the first 3 tiers, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, Elsevier is taking the leadership position in all these tiers, especially in the first 2 tiers. Elsevier has a dominant position in hybrid and subscription journals. And we are quickly catching up in open access journals on the right-hand side of this table. Yeah. Next. You might be wondering what will influence your place on the rankings and what you can do to help about your ranking. So first, let's assure you that the business is as usual because the data sets are mainly based on JCR. So in other words, if your journal is already in JCR, so virtually you do not need to do much. In essence, it is a reordering of a basket of metrics by CAS. They wanted to emphasize on the consistency of citation distribution, so a little bit different than the impact factor itself. However, impact factor still counts. And by looking at those tiers, because you have seen that the top 5 go to tier 1 and the next top 15 goes to tier 2. So adding them up, they naturally formed the first quartile of JCR. So emphasis is really towards quartile, the first tier of the first quartile of JCR. So there are some nuances that you can manage. First, focus on original research rather than review articles, and also be mindful that if the impact of highly cited items have on your journals, to try to increase the number of your items. And also ensure that new titles are submitted for indexing into JCR. So we will do that for you, obviously. And on a daily basis, always communicate frequently with your main contact at Elsevier, that is your publisher, of any of your concerns. So next, I'm going to quickly talk about the early warning list of international journals. So this list are mainly composed of international titles published by international publishers. So CAS gradually have been feel it's responsible for issuing a list for researchers to be mindful about predatory journals to avoid publishing in this kind of titles. And also from our survey, we have observed that the researchers has labeled this inclusion on predatory journal list as the second most important factor that discourage them to publish and choose a journal. And the delta, the deviation across all subjects and across all career stage, it's still the minimal. So in other words, all researchers think that this journal warning list is super important for their choice. Next. The warning list indeed is composed of 3 levels, warning levels, so from low to high. The lowest warning levels are generally for those journals with large volume and high growth. In other words, expanding very quickly. The middle level are journals charging an APC that are deemed by CAS not matching its own quality, so charged more than enough in CAS eyes. The highest warning level, the risk level, are the journals with mass retractions and especially are linked to paper mills. So these are ethics issues, so are deemed, and therefore the journals are deemed at highest risk level. So as I said, that the goal for preparing this list is to set some alerts for both authors, but as well as publishers. So we as publishers do not need to be scared or worried about this list too much. We can rather take a view that this is some alert for us to keep attention to these areas, which CAS found it might be valuable. The size of the scope of the warning list for the past 2 years. So the journal list started in 2020. So on its first issuing, there were 64 journals on it. And this year, it is 36 titles. So the obvious trends in the list, since CAS is focusing on preparatory journals, so therefore open access titles occupied a larger share than the subscription titles. And retractions are very influential because they are deemed as the highest warning level. The excessively high Chinese author base is also seen by CAS as some certain types of risk, because they think that an international journal, international title published by an international publisher shall have a more reasonable mix of authorship. If a title is mainly composed of over 80% of Chinese authors, the authority will question if it is really an internationally oriented title. Fortunately, as from this year, publishers are given 3 months for appealing before the final release of the list, because we know that everyone somehow are afraid or wanted to avoid being listed on this warning list. So there will be some early message coming out from CAS, and publishers will have time to appeal and prepare some evidence to CAS so that they can be later removed from this list. So we have 2 successful cases in Elsevier as well. Next. So here are some other questions, like where you can get the retraction database, and if your retractions are linked to a paper mill. However, you as a society title, you do not know that this paper mill, and you only have a tiny number of retractions linked to this paper mill. Will you be listed on the higher risk level? We got an answer, and no, you will not be considered as a high warning level journal. And CAS warning list considers the proportion of Chinese authors. I have already mentioned that it will be a bit risky if the Chinese authorships occupies more than 80% of the entire pool. The last question is, we all know that journal needs development and you want it to grow fast as you can. If you have a small number of publications but grows fast, it will be fine. So the CAS is really targeting as those very large publications and grows very fast. They seem that they see those journals somehow expanding abnormally. Next.
I think yeah, over to me. Wrap up a little. So there was a bit of echo on the line there. I hope that disappears. I'll wrap up pretty swiftly because you've seen, I think, the main detail that we wanted to share on volume and quality and on warning lists. I thought it'd be useful for the deck, more than for me to go through now, to share some of our high-level priorities at a broad level, and you'll see the focus on excellence, which is entirely consistent with China's own focus, and you'll see that come through here. But also to shine a light then on the next slide on a more specific 22 focus, which is on the next slide, and that's really about it's about submissions, it's about acceptance rate, because we know that some of what's hindering us on acceptance rate is not to do with the quality of the content, it's to do with our ability to find it, filter it, sift through it, get it reviewed, understand it on the same terms as something else that comes from a native English language speaker, etc. It's about policy relationships and maintaining and building those government and ministerial relationships, and the institutional relationships and academician relationships. And that's then bridges to the last point around community networks. And engaging across all the dimensions of China's ecosystem with editors, reviewers, authors, and their institutions. I was going to leave you with, before the Q&A, with just a reminder of those frankly incredible volume and quality indexes. But Riaz, at your request, I picked one of the, so if we can go to the next slide, Steve. I thought I'd done some magic in the background here, but have obviously failed. I think we'll return to, in the Q&A, we'll return to this idea of what is it that authors are looking for, and what are their priorities in working with us and you as their potential publishers. So Steve, over to you to transition us, I think.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, thank you, Neil, and thanks to Wendy. Yeah, fascinating stuff. So we've got 10 minutes or so left. So as I mentioned at the beginning, please do pose your questions in the chat function. Meanwhile, we have got a question from May, so thank you, May. Is there a policy that encourages Chinese researchers to publish in Chinese language journals? Wendy, can I ask you to maybe comment on that?
Yes, the CAS Journal Excellence Program does encourage the Chinese researchers to submit to the Chinese language journals. As I've mentioned, that there are around 370 journals approved by the CAS Journal Excellence Program. And among them, there are over 100 titles are Chinese language based. So CAS is really emphasizing the Chinese language titles as well.
Yeah, and I look at that from the other end of the telescope in a way, which is also to reflect that China is so big, there's a policy almost for everything. And so the domestic journals business is definitely acquiring investment, and that's certainly true. But the more immediate pressure is international collaboration, international recognition, and international quality. So there's a lot of incentive in the system for authors to to continue to, and to increasingly submit to good quality international journals, because tenure, promotion, and funding are all intimately linked into your journal publishing record, and your journal publishing record is evaluated on its in part its international nature.
Yeah, also I wanted to add that some of you may know that Chinese journals have ACN number system. However, the authorities only approve the English language titles nowadays. The Chinese language titles are no longer approved, even though around 100 titles are included in the CAS program. So the authorities are really promoting that, requiring the researchers to write on the international standard titles.
Great, thanks, Wenyi and Neil. I think we have a question as well from Paula again. So Paula, thank you for joining. What systems do you have, or are you developing to identify paper mill papers? Do you have a database of suspect authors and institutions? Can AI play a part? Are other parts of the world a problem? Neil, maybe you can pick up on that, and maybe when you can add anything at the end.
Yeah, happy to. Without, I pretend it's not, I don't want to pretend it's an area of expertise for me. We use Authenticate for kind of plagiarism checks, and there's a part of that helps identify kind of the paper mill type produced paper. We've had stuff slip through, absolutely, and both in our proprietary and our society portfolio. We've had paper mill papers slip through, very few and far between, but it's certainly happened. Will AI play a role? Absolutely. Yes, I mean, it has to, because AI recognizes AI, and it's AI that is predominantly going to be producing, kind of paper mill type stuff in the future. And so that will absolutely play a role, and we're very invested in kind of making that happen. I think there are a couple of different industry kind of approaches to this. One is a kind of, I would almost treat it like a manual kind of, it's, in fact, you referred to it in your question, Paula, is it, database of suspect authors and institutions. I think that's too light an approach to solve the problem. It can help in in the short term in some ways, but ultimately it's staggeringly easy to evade being on a database, and it's unbelievably easy to clone an author profile, or to adopt a new author profile, or a new institutional profile, or whatever it may be. So that will not be the answer, but it will be part of the answer, because there will be people who are foolish enough to be repeat offenders. But actually, technology will play a big role here, and we are invested in finding increasingly good, and Authenticates helps a lot, but increasingly good solutions for this, because it's a reputational risk for all of us, and that's one of the worst risks that we all employ. So yeah, I think it's material. I think it's a present problem. It's not a solved problem yet. AI will be a big part of the answer. Databases a small part of the answer, because they're too easy to beat. And are other parts of the world a problem? Yeah, it's not a China problem. It's a global problem.
Okay, thanks, Neil. So Ben, thanks for your questions. Any plans for a greater cooperation between KI and Elsevier? Well, Neil, one of you.
Yeah, let me take that. I mean,
yeah.
Guy is may not be well known on the call, so let me just kind of amplify the background to that. So Elsevier is is a partner with CSPM, in China, in CAI. So we are a part owner of CAI Publishing, which is a Chinese domestic publisher. And CAI uses Science Direct, uses a number of our systems, tools, processes, etc. But it's an independent publishing entity. CSPM are the majority owner, and so that is more that question is really more in CSPM's gift than our own. Or the answer to that question is more in CSPM's gift than our own. And CAI actually absolutely legitimately, will have a somewhat different strategy to our own. If I were to characterize that now, I would say that they're broadly more domestically focused, whereas Elsevier is more international focused. But it's more I would say a question for CSPM rather than us. I hope that makes sense as an answer, Ben.
All right, thanks, Neil. So we are close to ending the session. Any other questions before we end? And I need to remember to do the poll. I've got in front of me, I've got a big words that says poll on it in highlighted. I need to remember to do it. So any other questions before we close? No? Okay, so what I would do is I'll do the poll and then we'll just have some final remarks before closing. So I'm going to launch the poll now. And you have two questions. The first one, has this webinar helped your understanding of the market dynamics in China? Yes, a little, no. And are there any additional topics you'd like us to focus on? So that can be specific to China or indeed other topics. If you do have others, if you can just add them to the chat function, then we'll be able to pick those up afterwards. So I think we've, I'll give you another 20 seconds or so.
Yeah, and I'll just add that we will share materials, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so I think we're very close to, yeah. So let me end this poll. Yeah, and you should be able to see the results there. So has it helped? Yes, 93%, a little, 0%, no, 7%. So generally pretty good. Maybe a little bit of work for us there. And on the topics, yeah, I think there's going to be some coming through on the chat function, which is useful. So do send these through. Thank you.
Yeah, and if I can just double down on that, because we were a bit nervous because it's really hard to know at what level to pitch this. And so thank you. I'm really gratified by the poll answer, but please do guide us. Like, these are for you, and we want to be of service. So please do guide us on what you would like to see. Thank you, Paula. It's good to see.
Great. So I think with that, just a very big thank you for everyone for joining. I really appreciate that. And as Neil said, we're going to be having follow-up after this session, looking at other topics. So do appreciate your feedback on that. So thanks very much, everyone. Thank you for joining and enjoy the rest of today. Bye for now.
Yeah, thank you all. Bye.